Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Into the Ether. Hey everyone, Sylvie here. Sorry about that, feeling a little weird tonight, but honestly, when aren't I weird? Anyway, I want to go ahead and jump straight into this video because I think it's going to be long enough as it is, so let's just go ahead and get right into it. This is part 3 of my JonBenet's Ramsey series, and in this video I'm going to focus on John Ramsey and his possible involvement in JonBenet's death. In this video, I'm actually going to spend less time on case analysis kind of information and more time on my visions around John Ramsey, because I've actually had some fairly detailed visions around the case at this point, and I think that it would be best if I broke those down. So in this one, I'm going to focus on John Ramsey, and although I might mention Patsy because I definitely see her there, it's definitely going to focus on John himself. And then I'm going to do a fourth part to this series where I'm going to kind of wrap the whole thing up. I will explain my visions around Patsy specifically. In that fourth part, I will focus on her. So that will be more of my whole vision in its entirety rather than broken down by each family member. But at any rate, like I said, this one here is going to focus on John Ramsey, and I am going to go through just a small amount of, I guess you could call it, case analysis to start with, just so I can give you guys some context and help you understand my visions around John and how they fit into the case as a whole. Okay, so the first thing that I want to clarify that I think a lot of people are confused about is John Ramsey's occupation at the time that JonBenet was murdered. I think it's a very common misconception that John Ramsey was the CEO of Lockheed Martin at that time, and that actually is not the case. I had mentioned in part 1 that I believed that John had actually owned his own business. And so I did make sure to look it up for this video, and it turns out that what actually happened was in 1989, John Ramsey founded a company called the Advanced Product Group. This company ended up being one of 3 companies that merged together to become a company called Access Graphics. Access Graphics was a company that sold Unix-based computer systems, and if you guys even know what that is, Unix is essentially Linux. It's the operating system that Windows is based on, basically. So that was essentially the very first operating system for computers. So in 1991, Access Graphics was actually purchased by Lockheed Martin. So at that time, John Ramsey became the president and CEO of Access Graphics, which had become a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin because they purchased it in 1991. So John Ramsey was not the CEO of Lockheed Martin. He was the CEO of a company which was the subsidiary of Lockheed Martin by purchase. I think it's also interesting to note here that at that point in time, John Ramsey his net worth was about $6.4 million. So that's another reason that the $118,000 demanded in the ransom note was very curious, because John Ramsey could obviously afford much more than that. But that's something that I'll go into a lot more detail over in the next part of the series. I'm not going to go too deep into any interviews with John Ramsey. I feel like enough people have analyzed that information and his behaviors. The only thing that I do actually want to talk about, and the thing that I think was actually most damning to John Ramsey in regards to the death of his daughter, and that is Linda Ardnt's interview with ABC News. If you are not familiar with Linda Ardnt, she is the officer that was present at the Ramsey home at the time when JonBenet was found. So she was actually there from like 8:10 in the morning until 10:45 or after the coroner had taken away JonBenet's body late that night. I believe she was there the whole time. So because of the fact that she was the officer that was present when JonBenet was found, she came out several years later and she did an interview, and she basically named John Ramsey as the killer in that interview without actually saying those words. She said everything that she could possibly say to name John Ramsey as the killer without actually coming out and flat out saying it. So I've actually just taken a few clips from that interview and I've put them together kind of as one shorter compilation that focuses on the information that more closely pertains to the visions that I had around John Ramsey. I'm going to go ahead and play those clips here. If you'd like to skip over the interview with Linda Ardnt, then please check the description. I will have the timestamps there in the description so that you can go straight to my evaluation.
Know who killed JonBenet. There's no doubt in my mind who killed JonBenet. And while this investigation is still ongoing, I don't think it's appropriate that I say that name out loud.
8:10 a.m., Ardnt arrived at the Ramsey home and meets John Ramsey for the first time.
How did he strike you?
Cordial.
Cordial?
Mm-hmm.
Upset?
Cordial.
Distraught?
Cordial.
Did it strike you at all that that was behavior that was unusual for somebody whose child was just kidnapped?
It's been my experience that people respond to trauma in different ways. So if someone has a response that is different from mine, I don't put judgment to it. I'll just note it. I remember seeing John in the kitchen, looking through his mail, and I made a note that he was looking at his mail, and then I wondered, where did your mail come from?
Isn't it possible maybe he was opening the mail looking for a clue from the kidnapper?
I don't know, and I don't speculate. It's a piece of information that I see. It's something that I note.
You thought it was unusual, however.
I can say that it stuck out.
10 a.m., the deadline imposed by the writer of the ransom note for a telephone call.
10 o'clock comes and goes, and there's no acknowledgement within the house from anyone that the deadline imposed by the author of the ransom note is come and gone.
Nobody said it's 10 o'clock and the kidnappers haven't called?
Nobody said that.
Was that something else you took note of?
Absolutely. And I see John Ramsey carrying JonBenet up the last 3 steps from the basement. And my mind exploded. And everything that I had noted that morning that stuck out instantly made sense. And JonBenet was clearly dead. Then she's been dead for a while. I ordered him to put JonBenet down. I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me, and his face was just inches from mine. And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And I told him to go back to the room and to dial 911. And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up. I said everything made sense in that instance. And I knew what happened.
Do you think your fear was well-founded?
You bet I do. There's no doubt in my mind.
To this day?
Never wavered.
You were afraid because you thought the killer was still in the house.
I knew it.
Absolutely?
Absolutely.
Okay, I do want to drop in a quick disclaimer here just before I get into my evaluation. This part of the video is going to be based solely on my opinions and interpretations. Everything that I'm about to talk about as far as the interview with Linda Ardnt and the way that she perceives John Ramsey and the way that I believe that John Ramsey has behaved and things of that nature, that is all my opinion. My visions, obviously, are my opinion and my interpretations of the things that I see and feel. Okay, so none of this is proven fact. The first part of the video had some facts in it, as far as John Ramsey's employment and things of that nature, but the rest of this video is going to be based solely on my opinion. So Linda Ardnt said a lot, even in just those few clips that I showed you. And like I mentioned earlier, I feel that her being the officer that was present at the time that JonBenet was found made her statements even more damning than probably anybody else that may have been at the scene that day. She says that John was cordial when she first met him, that he seemed nonchalant, I guess is what she was trying to say. She mentions him going through his mail. She mentions that when 10 a.m. was the time when the alleged kidnapper was supposed to call, 10 o'clock comes and goes, and supposedly nobody makes any mention of it. And then, of course, once JonBenet is found, she talks about how she saw something in John Ramsey's eyes when they were determining whether JonBenet was still alive or not. The main reason that I wanted to show these clips in this video is because all of the things that Linda Ardnt is talking about do pertain to the visions that I had around John Ramsey. And based on what I'm seeing and feeling, I think that Linda Ardnt has it all wrong. I think that her interpretations are coming from her inexperience. I think they're coming from naivety. I think the more that she thought about the case over the 3 years that had lapsed, because the murder was in 1996 and the interview was in 1999, the more she thought about it, the more her mind created fear. And the more her mind created, some things around, particularly John Ramsey, that may or may not have been her initial interpretations. I'd be interested to see her actual initial police report, because I think that would tell whether she actually, felt that way, whether she really saw some kind of admission, or I'm not really sure what she's claiming to have seen in John Ramsey's eyes when they were face to face over JonBenet. Now, please understand that I am not saying that I believe that John Ramsey is 100% innocent of anything and everything. I am not saying that he did not have any knowledge of anything around JonBenet's case. I am just saying that I think that Linda Ardnt allowed some irrational fears and the pressure around the situation to cloud her perception and perhaps even her judgment. So that's just my opinion. But anyway, what I really want to talk about in this video is the actual visions that I had around the things that Linda Ardnt is talking about in her interview. So basically, when I was doing some research for this case, I was watching hours of interviews, and once I got to Linda Ardnt's interview, I started having some visions around the things that she was talking about. And I will definitely get into those in just a moment, but I actually want to go back just a little bit further, because I was able to see back into the night before JonBenet was killed, and so I definitely want to start there. The first thing that I actually see is the Ramseys getting home from, I'm assuming, the Christmas parties that they had gone to that day, because this would have been Christmas Day. At this point, I believe it's relatively late at night, 10:30, 11 o'clock. I'm not really sure 100% what the time is, but it's definitely later in the evening. The whole family is coming in through the garage, through like a mudroom. So Burke walks in, Patsy walks in, and John walks in. He's carrying JonBenet. She's sound asleep. I think both John and Patsy did mention on several occasions that when they got home that night, JonBenet was sound asleep. And I do see that. I see John, he walks through the kitchen. He goes up the main front stairs, not the spiral staircase, but up the front stairs. And he takes JonBenet straight to her room. He lays her down in her bed. She's wearing a cute little Christmas dress, like a red kind of sparkly little dress, white tights, black shoes. He gets her undressed. He puts her pajamas on. He covers her up and walks out of the room. JonBenet is sound asleep from what I'm seeing, you guys. He leaves the room. He closes the door. Not all the way, but just closes it mostly. When the family came in the house, I saw Patsy go pretty much straight up the stairs. Burke asked her if he could get a snack, and she said, if you can get it yourself, then yes, you can. And basically, she just went upstairs and she left Burke in the kitchen. So I see John putting JonBenet to sleep, and then he comes down the spiral stairs and he goes into the kitchen and he tells Burke that it's time for bed. Burke tells John that he needs to clean up his snack, and John tells him, we'll just do it tomorrow. So then the two of them go upstairs and Burke gets ready and John puts him into bed and tucks him in and then walks out of the room and closes the door, leaves it a little bit ajar, but mostly closes it just like he did with JonBenet's door. And then he goes upstairs to the 3rd floor. Now, I just want to remind everybody quickly again that this is my vision, so this is just my opinion and my interpretations of what I'm seeing around John Ramsey, okay? So he goes up to the 3rd floor, and Patsy is in the bathroom getting ready for bed. So John gets undressed. He's wearing boxers and a thin white shirt, like an undershirt. And he gets into bed. He picks up some reading glasses, I'm assuming, and a book. And he starts to read a book. Some time goes by, I don't know how long, 20 minutes, a half an hour maybe, and then Patsy finally comes out of the bathroom. I'll get into that a bit more in my segment that focuses on Patsy, but basically she gets into the bed, she gives John a kiss, and she rolls over and she says goodnight. So then I see John put down the book and his glasses, and he turns off the light, and then he also rolls over and goes to sleep. Once again, this would have been Christmas night, so December 25th, late at night. The next time that I actually see John is the next morning. So Patsy has already gotten up. She's already out of the bed, just like they both claim that she was. I do see that. I believe in several interviews, John says that he thinks he was shaving. I don't see that he was shaving. I see that he's sitting on the edge of the bed, and it looks like he's just basically trying to get himself to wake up. So he's still, as far as what I'm seeing, he's still sitting there. He's not dressed. He still has his boxers and his white t-shirt on. And he's basically just, rubbing his eyes and trying to get himself to wake up. That's when I do see him hear Patsy scream. At that point, I see John jump up. He grabs some pajama pants that are laying nearby, and he runs down the stairs. He's saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? Patsy is on the 2nd floor, just outside JonBenet's bedroom door, and she's saying JonBenet is gone. There's a note. She's perceivably in a panic. John does not read the note. He just says, call 911. Patsy runs down the spiral stairs, and John, as far as what I'm seeing, runs into JonBenet's bedroom. And he just looks around, looks under the bed, looks in her bathroom or closet, just kind of searches around the room for whatever reason. Then he runs down the spiral staircase to where Patsy is. At that point, Patsy is already on the phone to 911, and John grabs the note and he spreads it out on the floor, and he's trying to read the note in its entirety. At least that's what I believe. He may be looking for clues or something like that. Patsy finishes her call with 911, and I don't actually see her hang up the phone right away, which I find kind of interesting because I did not think that there was really anything to that recording that people say that they can hear voices at the end of the 911 call. I didn't disregard that there was a possibility that she didn't hang up the phone, but I didn't really think that they were saying anything to anyone, because I had said in my previous vision, in a previous part 2 of this series, that I didn't see Burke come downstairs at this point or anything like that. But at any rate, I do see Patsy standing there with the phone in her hand. She hasn't hung it up. So anyway, while Patsy's holding the phone, John is saying, where was the note? Where did you find it? And she says, on the stairs. And then she immediately says, the police are coming. Then I see her hang up the phone and pick it up to dial, I'm assuming, the friends that she had called over to the house that day. So at that point, I see John run back up the stairs. So he goes all the way back up to the 3rd floor. He's going up to get dressed. He puts on some clothes. And by the time that he's fully dressed, I see that there are already officers there. So John runs downstairs and opens the front door, and he starts frantically trying to explain to the police what's going on. He calls for Patsy. He's asking her for the note, and so on and so forth. So I don't really see a whole lot more in the house at that moment when there's all the chaos going on from when the police first get there and things like that. But I do see a little bit more from later on in the day when Linda Ardnt is the only officer that's left at the scene. So when Linda gets there at 8:10, she says that she feels like John Ramsey is greeting her in a very cordial manner. Well, the only thing that I have to say about that is at that point in time, it had already been several hours. So I would imagine that, the panic has probably left a little bit, and now you're at a point where you're thinking that you need to have a little bit of composure. And you also need to remember that John Ramsey is the CEO of an enormous company. He founded his own company. He built it up. He merged with another company, well, two other companies, and then was bought out by an enormous company like Lockheed Martin. And he's always put into these situations where he has to maintain his composure in high-stress situations. And yes, this is a little bit different. This is not a business deal. This is his daughter. Well, at this point in time, they believe that she's been kidnapped, right? But still, I still think that as a CEO and with the experience that he would be trying his very best to maintain his composure and to seem like he was a competent, rational person. And once again, I am not in any way excusing John Ramsey or saying that he has no knowledge of anything, okay? Please understand that. Based on what I'm seeing around that interaction when Linda Ardnt first got to the Ramsey home, I wouldn't call John Ramsey's behavior cordial. I would say that he does seem relatively calm, but like I said, I think that he's really just trying to maintain his composure at that point. Okay, now this is where things start to get just a little bit more interesting. At this point in time, John, and as far as I believe, has had an ample amount of time to look over the quote-unquote ransom note, right? And he's had a chance to read it thoroughly. He's had a chance to look at it and inspect it. And I really honestly believe, you guys, that on that very first day, after things had calmed down a little bit and John had the opportunity to actually look at the note, I believe that he honestly did wonder if Patsy had written that note. Because several people, including Linda Ardnt, had mentioned that they found it strange that John and Patsy stayed pretty much in separate rooms the entire day before JonBenet was found. So most of the time, I think that John was in the living room and Patsy was in the den with her friends. Well, I do find that strange. I honestly do find that strange. But I honestly think that the reason that was occurring is because John, at that point, was already suspecting that Patsy may have written the note, that Patsy may have had something to do with JonBenet's disappearance. And that leads me into this next bit here. Linda Ardnt had said that she had seen John casually going through his mail. Well, I do see that. And he had mentioned at one point in, it was one interview or several interviews, I'm not really sure. It's kind of all starting to blend together at this point. But he had mentioned that people really blew that out of proportion a lot because they're like, a lot of people are like, oh my God, he went outside and checked his mail and everything while his daughter was missing. No, they have a slot in their front door. Their mail was delivered through the slot in their front door, not in an outside mailbox. So John does mention at one point that there was a pile of mail on the floor by the front door. So literally all that happened was that he walked over to the front door and he picked up the pile of mail and then he walked into the kitchen to go through it. Well, he also mentions in interviews that he was looking for correspondence from the killer. He thought maybe the killer might have sent a letter, or maybe he had popped a note through the slot, or who knows what had happened. Well, I think that is a bit of a lie. I think that what John was actually doing when he was going through that mail and going through some of the other paperwork in the kitchen was, I think that he was trying to look for a sample of Patsy's writing. I think that he was trying to find something that he could compare the ransom note to, and obviously that's not something that would be in the brand new mail that had just come in, but I don't think that he was actually looking through the brand new mail. I think that he was using that as kind of a diversion, saying, oh, I'm looking for communication from the kidnapper, because he doesn't want to divulge to anyone at that point that he has a suspicion that his own wife may have written the ransom note. And try to think about it rationally, you guys. I mean, in that situation, what would you do? Would you be able to wrap your head around it? I don't know. I honestly have no idea what I would do in that situation. Okay, so anyway, the next thing that Linda Ardnt talks about is the fact that the ransom note said that the kidnapper would call between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m., I believe is what it said. And 10 o'clock came and went, and supposedly, according to her, no one said a word. Nobody made any reaction. Nobody made any mention of it. Nobody asked what they should do. The time, 10 o'clock, 10 a.m. just came and went, and that was it. I'm not saying that didn't happen. I'm just saying that I think that Linda Ardnt might have already been a little biased about the situation, and she might have been a little bit uneasy already, so she may have been reading things into that situation that didn't actually pertain. My opinion of that situation, and as far as what I'm seeing in my visions, I believe that the reason that nobody reacted to that time is because, first of all, I don't know that the friends that were present were 100% aware of the time frame. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. But I believe that John didn't react at that point because he was deep in the midst of suspecting that Patsy had written the ransom note. And I think that he was waiting to see what was going to happen or how she was going to react. Because honestly, at that point in time, what else could you do if you were in that situation? Patsy, on the other hand, couldn't really react, could she? If she was the one who actually wrote the note, and she actually orchestrated the whole thing like I kind of suspect that she did, she couldn't say, damn it, I told the kidnapper to call at 10. Or she couldn't, I suppose she could have acted like she was upset or concerned, but at that point in time, if she did have something to do with it, if she did write the note, if she did orchestrate a fake kidnapping or something like that, she's probably wondering what in the world is going on. Why isn't the plan playing out the way that she expected it to? So the last bit of what Linda Ardnt had discussed in her interview, and probably the most important of everything that she actually said, was when John Ramsey found JonBenet's body. I don't have a full vision of that entire scene just yet, but what I do see is the interaction that Linda Ardnt is talking about when she instructs John to put JonBenet on the floor and they both lean over her to see if she's breathing. So I do see JonBenet laying there on the floor in the hallway, like the foyer, and I do see the two of them leaning down, and they are looking directly into each other's faces. And in my opinion, I don't see whatever it is that Linda Ardnt sees on John Ramsey's face. I see shock, I see fear, I see panic, confusion. I don't see the cold, dead-eyed stare of a killer. I don't. And I know a lot of people think that John Ramsey either killed JonBenet or that Patsy Ramsey killed JonBenet and that John covered it up. But I'm sorry, you guys, that's just not what I'm seeing, and it's not what I'm feeling. And honestly, it's never really been what I felt around the case. Like I've said before, I've always felt that Patsy was involved in some way or shape or form, but I do not feel like John actually initially had anything to do with it or knew what was going on straight off the bat. During that interaction, I do also definitely see the fear on Linda Ardnt's face. And I think that, maybe she does actually suspect that John is the killer at that point, because I do see a certain amount of fear in her expression while she's sitting there looking face to face with John Ramsey. So that is really about the extent of the visions that I have that are focusing directly on John at the moment. I do actually have some more information, and I do have more visions around the entire situation, but like I said, I do want to put that into a fourth segment that is going to focus more on Patsy Ramsey, because the bits of information that I have that are in addition to what I've already shared really put a lot of things into perspective around Patsy's possible involvement in all of this. So just to recap this segment just a little bit, basically what it comes down to is I don't believe that John was directly involved in harming JonBenet. I don't believe that John Ramsey was involved in covering up the initial murder of JonBenet, but I do believe that at least at some point, John Ramsey did suspect Patsy Ramsey of writing the ransom note that was associated with JonBenet's disappearance and ultimate death. I will definitely go into a little more detail around what I believe John's suspicions were in my next video, but for this video, I think I'm just going to go ahead and wrap things up. As always, thank you so very much for listening. I will definitely be talking to everyone again very, very soon. Bye.